Hey Sequence family, you are getting this video because you listed one of the most common barriers to exercise. That is, I didn't feel like I was motivated enough to exercise. Now, there's going to be a two-pronged behavioral approach to this that I believe can be quite helpful to you. One is going to involve what are we doing in the exact moment where we feel like our motivation is lower. And then part two is how do we get to a point where that just simply doesn't happen, where we have a steady state of motivation. So first let's talk about the waxing and waning of motivation. And I'm sure you've felt this before, is maybe one day you're here on motivation, it's quite high, the next day it's a little bit lower, and then maybe it goes back up, and then maybe it trickles back off again. So you know something about motivation is that it is typically, especially during your initial stages of trying to make this exercise a routine, it's not steady. It's not going to always be like that. Some days we're not going to feel as motivated as we usually do. And that can make it particularly hard to want to exercise. So the first thing that I would let you know is this is completely normal. This motivation changes daily, it changes weekly, it can even change hour by hour. I could want to exercise, be quite motivated to exercise in the morning, but then later in the day I get affected by a number of things, family things, work things, school things, that makes it more challenging to do. So first step is knowing that that is completely normal. But what do we do in this context? So what we do in this context is, first I want you to imagine two dials. One, a motivation dial, and two, a task demand dial, okay? So if our motivation is really high, we can do almost any task, okay? So if I was really motivated to exercise for an hour every single day, I probably would be able to do that, but that's not typically the case. Our motivation isn't always gonna be cranked up to max, okay? A lot of times motivation changes, the motivation dial goes down a little bit. If we don't also change the task demand dial to match our motivation, then we're probably going to miss our session, and it's going to be a lot harder to make exercise a routine, which this is actually part two, so I'll do a quick fast track, is once exercise is a routine, once exercise is a part of who we are, we have a much more steady, consistent motivational flow, okay? So back to what I was saying is oftentimes we don't turn down the task demand dial to match our motivation dial, and that means we miss a training session. So knowing having low motivation is completely normal, and if that's the case for you, give yourself permission to make the exercise less challenging. So let's say that I had planned doing resistance training for 45 minutes, but my motivation was low. In this case, I can turn down the task demand by giving myself permission to just do 15 minutes of strength training. Another thing that you can do is what I call a starter step. So I often think when motivation is low, the hardest part about exercising is getting started. And a lot of you have given me that information back to me and said the hardest part is getting started, but once I get started, I end up doing it. So the starter step is, what's the minimum thing that I need to do to get started? So some people say, I just need to put on my exercise clothes and then my exercise shoes. Once I get my exercise shoes on, I know I'll get going. Other people might say, I just need to get in my car and turn it on, and then I'll be going to the gym. And other people might say, I just need to walk into my exercise room. So think about, one, actually turning down the task demand, and two, thinking about a starter step as the only thing that you need to do. So that's a way of mentally turning down the task demand. Now, there's ways to boost your motivation, which coincide nicely with part two, is what I want you to focus on in the long run. So in the long run, we want to focus on how can we make exercise a part of who we are. That is, how can we make exercise become integrated into our identity? Because if we consider ourselves to be exercisers, then we actually feel uncomfortable when we don't exercise. And that's a good place to be, because then you are motivated to correct that feeling of discomfort. But it takes a little while to get there. So as you are progressing, I want you to focus on these things in the near term. One is focus on the value that you have connected to exercise. So while enjoying exercise is really important, and I want you to have fun when you exercise, that's really vital to making it become a part of who you are, I want you to also focus on why this is important to you. Why is becoming healthier important to you? And if you're feeling low motivation in that moment, try to connect these values to doing the behavior. Remind yourself why it's important to you. What are you going to gain from consistently engaging in exercise? So that's one thing. As you're progressing too, so this is actually one reason why I like focusing on this with strength training, is focus not necessarily just on a separate outcome, like how much weight am I losing, but focus on what skills am I improving? Am I able to do more challenging exercises? And then also focus on like actual physical improvements. Am I able to lift more weight? Did I used to only be able to hold a plank for 10 seconds and now I can do 20 seconds? So focus on improvement, okay? The next thing that I want you to focus on is commitment. So commitment to me is actually one step beyond a goal. So let's say I had a goal of engaging in strength training 2 times per week, or I had a goal of walking 1 mile each day. Rather than just say that's my goal, say this is my commitment. There's even websites such as stick.com, which you can take a look at that, where you can make what's called a commitment contract. So the next thing is make a firm commitment to whatever you are going to do. So right now we have connect the behavior to your values, focus on commitment, okay? So actually make sure that you are committing to it. Focus on skill enhancement. And those things are really, really crucial to eventually having exercise become a part of who you are. So of course, this is going to be one of our number one barriers is we're not feeling that motivated. So just to recap, in the moment, give yourself permission to turn down that task demand dial, okay? And that should make it a little bit easier. Also, ways to boost our motivation is remind yourself why it's important to you, focus on what you're improving on, and then also make a firm commitment. Those 3 things right there in the long run, if we can do that, and again, if we can do that consistently, exercise will eventually become a part of who we are. We'll feel uncomfortable if we don't do it. And that's a good place to be, because in that instance, again, motivation is going to be a lot more of a smooth stream than this up and down and this waxing and waning that we typically experience. All right, so good luck with that. And remember, if you are still struggling, please reach out. We can have another chat, or we can have a chat for the first time. And I think that can also be helpful to help you uncover and unlock your own motivation for exercise.